A few years ago, the idea of cooperation between China and the United States was generally approved. Perhaps on the American side, it was assumed that the cooperation would be as it is in much of the world. Americans decide what needs to be done, and others cooperate in doing it. Or, when necessary, others respond by joining the United States in pressuring the hesitant nation to do as America wishes. As long as this was the situation, Americans could be quite flexible about how it was implemented. But when it became clear that China had other agenda than pleasing the United States and was able to implement them with or without American support, matters changed, sometimes quite abruptly. China became a competitor. It became the most serious and successful competitor. That meant that it must be defeated or punished. Defeat and punishment are terms used to describe what one wants to do to enemies. China was treated as an enemy. And many of those who advocate enmity recognize that China is America's most serious competitor. It is, therefore, enemy number one. In short, it is the greatest obstacle to the realization of global domination by the United States. In my view, this analysis is accurate. If being independent of the United States entails being an enemy, then China is its enemy. And its realization of its national goals are in greatest contradiction to the realization of the national goals of the United States. American policy must be to weaken China. Americans don't like to think that American policy requires it to make unreasonable demands of others. Hence, American propaganda must show that the government of China is a threat to all its neighbors and even to its own people. These neighbors are persuaded to view China as a threat to their independence. The American people are persuaded that if China is allowed to reassert sovereignty over these regions without the consent of the people, this will be just the kind of imperialism that we thought we had ended with the Allied victory in World War II. American propaganda has been quite successful in that the United States is being tough on China. It is a politically correct position for politics. And most Americans genuinely think that the danger to democracy comes from China rather than from America's allies and dependencies. America has helped its allies continue to depict the United States as the global example of democracy and defender of democracy where its forms are already established. The United States has been successful in many places, but more and more it is recognized that China is not really any more of a threat than the United States. Those countries that remain American lapdogs are declining. These alliances of the United States are more and more based on the advantage of those people of those countries who have gained from this alliance. Only in the United States do we still see the United States as standing bravely for human freedom in a time when it is challenged on all sides. Elsewhere, people understand that threats, explicit or implicit, about what happens to those who want to change their role in the world are a large part of the support for the status quo. Actually, the success of American propaganda, even in the United States, is not as clear as I have made it seem. It is true that both political parties are committed to retain economic control of the United States and to rule the country for the sake of the great corporations. However, there are many individual citizens and college professors who are quite disappointed and disappointing to the powers that be. The powers that be have created an academic orthodoxy that calls for universities just to teach facts and stay away from values. Avoiding discussion of values never meant that the ways that were taught were neutral, and the dominance of the orthodoxy is weakening. Also, orthodoxy always allowed the glorification of capitalism and the denigration of socialism. But students do not want to pretend that they are indifferent to the crimes of their nations in the international scene. The strong convictions that are evoked by the aim of reducing the populations the rulers find inconvenient have not been reduced by the efforts to keep them out of the classroom. If we Americans want to claim superiority for our society over many others, we can note that our college students and their teachers are vigorous in their expressions of critiquing our government. I fear that the government's tolerance of this kind of opposition is declining. The threat to democracy in American higher education is economism. Few university presidents want to report to their boards that their corporate gifts have declined by 50%. But if their universities are seen to yield quickly to the ethical demands of students rather than support the independent development of corporations, such losses can be expected in many places. American Zionists may not be very numerous, but many of them are strategically located with respect to finance. We face a very basic question. If American domination of the planet is our global goal, then American Zionist propaganda deserves our full support. China is our #1 threat. But if we push for policies favorable primarily to the United States, people, sooner or later, we're likely to find ourselves in nuclear war. If the health of a home for human beings is our greatest concern, then our task is to gather leaders of the process movement with well-informed students of the surface of this planet, scholarly advocates of sustainable development of China, and Americans committed to responsible policies for both the United States and the world to discuss what we need to do together. The goal will be to consider how to advance toward an ecological civilization. Perhaps the highest priority will be to avoid war. The first step is putting together a group of thinkers whose names evoke respect, perhaps a dozen people. Their task will be to come up with proposals for how to restore and maintain the health of the planet. Preferably, there will be a minimum of people who think that benefiting their individual persons at the expense of others is an adequate goal in life. It rarely leads to happiness. But society is now often organized to promote this goal. We need to encourage its broadening without asking people to put down their normal, healthy desires for this or that. It is at this point that our existential realization of the interconnectedness of our lives enables us to integrate our concerns for others with our concerns for ourselves. The extreme point is that if each person seeks his or her advantage at the expense of others, the remaining resources of the earth will be used in this competition and not be available to meet real human needs. Ideally, we would all want more goods to be available to meet our shared needs. We all need a healthy planet which produces enough for all of us to have and share what we need, and much else that we all want. The next step is to get a few Chinese and a few Americans to agree to work on this project. My thought is that we start with groups of 4 Chinese and Americans, leave it to them to constitute as voting members of the new organization, offer to help in any way we can, and then wish them well. It would be good if it is important that an established committee be understood to have responsibility. I would recommend, on the American side, the Center for Process Studies. I would recommend including David Bohm. People expect original ideas from him. My hope is that 2 or 3 suggestions could be ready for public discussion soon and would attract wide attention. Hopefully, government employees would enter the discussion. Since we are looking for new ideas, it might be possible for everyone to consider ideas on their merits. It is just possible that we could break out of the trap of deciding which country the ideas would benefit. We might change the tenor of the discussion. Let's hope. Anyway, for the Earth, our common home, the cooperation between China and USA is urgently needed. Let us work for it.